Hello. Okay. Hello, good morning again, and welcome. This is something that we call the new internet. How the internet is going to be in the next, who knows, 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 30 years, 100. So we've invited some people whose work happens on the internet. They research, they work in companies, they have started companies, they do different projects, more artistic, more research focused, etc., etc. But they are going to talk about what they do right now. Let me introduce you to Ian Rogers. In some way, he has made the internet and music as we know it. Yes. Mat Dryhurst, that he is a researcher and an artist, and he knows a lot of things about blockchain and blockchain communities. Alistair Alexander from the Info Activist Tactical Tech organization. They work on privacy, surveillance, and those kind of things. And moderating the talk, the journalist Lisa Blanning. Please welcome them. And I have to say that this panel is made in collaboration with the European Lab from Lyon. And it's made within the framework of We Are Europe. We are 8 European festivals who have a music festival and a forum or a conference, like this one that you are enjoying right now. So we have made this possible together. And that's it. Now let's go on with the talk, and applause again, please.
Hi, thanks everybody for coming. We're going to start out with some brief presentations for you to get a better idea what each of the panelists are working on. Let's start with Alistair,
sure,
if that's okay, if the tech team is ready.
Here we go. Is that showing?
Looks good.
Great. Okay. So I'm going to talk about the Glassroom. This is a project, an exhibition that my organization has been working on for the last couple of years around data and privacy. So my organization, Tactical Tech, we're based in Berlin. This is our official statement, but I don't really understand it, to be honest. These are some of the things we work on, though, so that's probably a bit more informative. We work on digital security with human rights activists. We have a project called Exposing the Invisible, which is around investigations, open source information with journalists. We also have a big gender tech program where we get technologists, women rights campaigners together around the world and bring them together to do interesting new projects to further their own particular agendas. So really, overall, we're working on technology, arts, and human rights. And we're working on these issues primarily outside of Europe and North America with campaigners, activists, journalists, investigators in Asia, in Latin America, in Africa. But what we really wanted to do was explore the ways we can look at these issues around data and privacy, which we're working with these people for about 15 years now. We're just getting our 15th anniversary. And how we can engage a wider public with that, how we can actually get people to think about data and privacy, because as you know, I'm sure all of you probably have some awareness of the issues around the data we're sharing, but probably aren't fully ready to engage in these things in a comprehensive way. So we started with this idea of a tech store with a twist, and this is the Glassroom in London, and we took over retail spaces and made them look like an Apple store. We used this kind of gleaming white aesthetic, inspired by things like 2001, A Space Odyssey, you know, that kind of white, futuristic, utopian vision of the future. And then this is the one in New York we did as well. So we did 3 in total. And the idea was that instead of, it looked like a tech store, it had a shop front, it was bringing in tourists and shoppers from the nearby areas, but instead of phones and tablets for sale, there was actually a series of objects around data and privacy which people could explore, which would prick their conscience, prick their understanding on these particular issues. Here's another picture from New York, and this is one of the main tables that we had in the space, and that was around the tech industry. So we had 4 key aims with this project, and we did this with Mozilla in New York and London, and that was to raise the public awareness on these issues, to create some kind of space where we could talk about these issues. But we also wanted to encourage people to take their own steps on data and privacy in a really accessible, engaging way, share that information with other people so they're starting some kind of a conversation on it. And then also critically to build a network of data and privacy champions who we called ingeniuses, teams of people who could actually teach people about data and privacy in these stores and then beyond that in their own communities.
And when was this?
Berlin, it was in March to May. That was the very first one. We did this with a big institution called the Hackaway in Berlin, the Haus der Kultur der Welt. And then we did New York in November 20. This is New York. There's the shop front there. We did that in. So very good question. It came just at the right time. So November to December 2016, and then we did London the year after. So just last year, just in the run up to Christmas, October to November. So the exhibition itself was based around 4 different narratives, all of them exploring different aspects and dimensions of the way the internet is used by us all today, and the kind of organizations, companies, and actors in the internet that shape the online world that we all experience. So the first one was called Something to Hide, and this was a series of art objects, a lot of them by local artists. We went to a lot of artists in Berlin, and we went to New York-based artists when we were in the US. And all of these explore the ways in which we are sharing data, sometimes consciously, often without our knowledge. And this particular one is one of the most popular exhibits we have there. It's called Forgot Your Password. It's an encyclopedia of 4.5 million passwords created by an artist, Aaron Bartle, based in Berlin. And these were the 14.5 million passwords stolen from LinkedIn a few years ago, and he's put them in alphabetical order. So these are all people looking for their own passwords, and quite often we find that people find their passwords. This was called We Know You. You saw another picture of this. This was exploring the tech industry, and all of the different objects in this table are covering different companies in the so-called GAFAM: Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple, Microsoft. The one in the foreground is called the Apple Tower. It shows the Apple's cash reserves. The one in the background is around the Alphabet empire, Google's investments and acquisitions. And you can see the bubble there around Mark Zuckerberg's house. We put it in a bubble because he bought all the 4 mansions around his own when he bought his mansion in Palo Alto. So that was around the tech industry, exploring the ways in which they are shaping our world. Then we have Big Mother, and Big Mother was a series of objects which explore the way that surveillance is being conducted by companies, governments, but it's presented in a way where it's actually taking care of us, as if it's something for our own good. So we explore things like, for example, smart health systems, also social media credit checks and things like that. And then Open the Box was a whole narrative with animations and videos exploring the whole projects that we're working in, and themes and topics that we often are trying to explain to people, like algorithms, social profiling. So the whole idea was it was a self-learning environment where people go in, they explore these kinds of issues. And then we have a data detox bar, and the data with our ingeniuses, you can see them behind there. And these were people we trained up in. This one was in London. And they would explain issues around data and privacy and also hand over our data detox kits. These are our data detox kits. We have them over there as well. So this is an 8-day guide to digital privacy. So the idea here is we're trying to get a very simple, accessible way of exploring these issues of data and privacy with a wider audience, and that's been very successful. So we got a huge amount of publicity for this and a huge amount of impact. And this is some of the coverage in New York. We actually got the data detox kit in Vogue, which is quite surprising for a bunch of smelly activists in Berlin, but there you go. So we had a huge amount of evaluation as well, and we had an incredible response from people coming in. They would stay in the spaces for hours, literally. They would stay all day. So we had these postcards, and we talked to people, and they were saying how incredible it all was. So this is all the kinds of things people were saying to us about it: informed, stimulated, slightly worried. These are the kind of queues we are having in New York. This one was in London. This is at the final weekend. We had about 20,000 people in 3 weeks coming through in London. So this idea that people don't really care about data and privacy, we think is a bit of a myth, that you create these kind of immersive spaces and then people really start to engage. And I think that was one of the key things we learned about this whole issue is actually, you know, we're talking about the new internet here, but really taking these issues offline into physical spaces and getting people to talk person to person makes a huge difference. And it was really the shared experience that people have when they see other people experiencing the same sensations that they do that really accentuates the idea that this is a really important issue. So we found that that really just takes people over a barrier and they really start to change their attitudes. And what we saw in our evaluation and findings from this is that it really changed people's thinking about this issue. So now over onto this year, and what we've been doing is adapting the whole exhibition, and we called it the Glassroom Experience, and it's a really cut-down version of it. And this is what we have over there on level 3 in Sónar+D. This is the very first version, which was in Prague. And the idea is we're taking some of the objects and we're creating a set, a really easy set. This is one we did in a Swedish library as well. Here's one we did in Tate Modern. And these are things we send to people in a box, and we're actually producing about 75 of these this year, and we'll be sending them around to organizations all across the world. Here's one that we did in the V&A in London as well. And the idea is that it's a DIY exhibition. Anybody can set this up in their own space to talk to their own audiences and talk about these issues of data and privacy. It starts these conversations, and then we give them the data detox kit to print, and they can give those out to people as well. Here's another one. This is the alphabet empire you saw in earlier places. We have this up there as well. And we created this as a dot-to-dot puzzle for people to fill out. So over the course of 2018, this will be going into all sorts of places. We've got people in Peru, Costa Rica, Mexico City, Nairobi, all around the world, a lot in Europe as well. So we're really starting a global conversation on this topic. And we're also doing slightly larger versions as well. This is one we did in Fashion Week. We went black for Fashion Week. This was a radical thing. This was in Berlin. And then we've just produced this app as well. I'm running out of time, you can probably tell. This is our app, which we've just launched as well in a new edition where we're exploring the issues of connected devices. And we're also doing a bigger version of it. This is one we did in Łódź in Poland, which is a mobile version of the exhibition, and this will be going around to spaces all over Europe over the course of the next few months as well. So over the course of the next year or so, 4 or 5 months, we'll be speaking to about 25,000, 30,000 people at least around data and privacy and starting that global conversation.
Okay, that sounds like pretty important work. Matt, tell us about some of the stuff that you're thinking about working on.
Perfect. So I have to preface this by saying I usually go really long, and 10 minutes is like a really short period of time. So to discipline myself, I've had bullet points here. So I'm an advocate for decentralized ownership of the internet, and I think many of these bullet points, this was kind of a free association thing on the plane here, are hopefully going to convince you that we can't afford anything but a decentralized ownership of the internet. So speaking a little to the work Alistair's been doing and Tactical Tech's been doing, why is all this data collected, right? So we live in an era of centralized Western platform monopolies. There's an argument to suggest that Web 2, the era of social media and the all-encompassing platform monopoly, was an inevitability. So Tim Berners-Lee, the creator of the World Wide Web, prioritized the hypertext protocol and the hyperlink, which proposed that the creator of a web page be given the freedom to remix and free associate between different ideas and inspirations. So at the time, this was legitimately revolutionary in a way of liberating information from stuffy archives and sharing it with the world under the spirit of the mantra that information wants to be free. This set the stage, however, for a decoupling of information from its source. Information once free from the strictures of attribution and provenance became available to those to be captured and utilized by those with the best means to ensnare it. So digital cartographers like Google developed ways to help people navigate this wilderness of new information. And the Safari mentality, in which the emphasis was placed on the discoverer and the curator of information rather than its original creator, led to vast social networks of people sharing things they had found online. This proved to be endlessly entertaining for people, much like DJing. These networks, despite producing very little original creations of their own, soon amassed user bases larger than some nation-states. With no original creative work or products to sell, they turned to advertising as a business model in order to recover the huge sums invested in them. So advertising and centralized sharing and discovery platforms are natural bedfellows. As it turns out, you can learn a great deal about people from what they spend their time doing and sharing online. You can discern their tastes, their mood, their political affiliations, and the same corresponding information of their peer groups. This is powerful information to provide to people who would like to manipulate society for commercial or even pernicious ends, and they will pay for it. And in fact, as we've learned through the work that Alistair does, we have paid for it. As under platform monopoly, we are the product, finding ourselves in a permanent loop of being sold, first to prospective advertisers, and then back to ourselves in a circular loop. Design decisions made under these transnational platform monopolies, with the directive of encouraging more sharing in order to stimulate more selling, have begun to have destabilizing political and cultural implications. This qualifies one strong argument against centralization. We are being trained out of the habit of navigating our own reality in return for the weak compensation of convenience. And increasingly, our careers and financial futures, cultures, and polity are vulnerable to the whims of a handful of engineers in California who are primarily beholden to the advertising and trivia industry. So that's a pretty grim analysis of that, right? So what's happening in China? China, who through their Great Firewall have fortified their populace from the influence of the Western internet, have been building their own stack. So China, given their communist history, takes naturally to the idea of a centralized internet and surveillance infrastructure. Many estimate that the Chinese economy may supersede the US economy in the next 10 years, some estimate in the next 5. China has also made significant strides ahead of the West in developing mobile payment and organization applications, where one can ostensibly organize your whole life through a single application such as WeChat, which also serves conveniently as a single point of access for the state to keep track of activity of its citizens. Reporters Without Borders ranks China 5th from bottom in the World Free Press Index. There have been well-documented cases of citizens being incarcerated for posting, quote, off-color jokes about politically powerful people, and myriad other human rights violations connected to digital surveillance. So China's advances in mobile applications can partly be attributed to the fact that so little banking or commercial infrastructure existed in the prior communist era. Rather than having to negotiate with powerful incumbent structures like the internet had to do in the West, they were free to build hypermodern toolkits and a new vision of the internet. If data is indeed the new oil, and the foundation upon which new businesses and empires will be built, then there is a race taking place at the moment, in which the centralized Western platform monopolies and the centralized Chinese mobile platform monopolies are competing to capture the data and commerce of developing nations throughout Africa and Asia who do not have the resources or experience to build their own networked infrastructure. So we have cases like in India or in South Africa right now, WhatsApp versus WeChat being a very real battle on the ground. There's a compelling argument to suggest that the Chinese stack is far better equipped to win that race, given their experience in building commercial systems with no reliance on incumbent infrastructure. So this posits a quite frightening scenario in which a centralized state government with a distaste for free speech and a distaste for the respective privacy of its subjects may stand to equip large areas of the developing world with the surveillance infrastructure that reports directly to Beijing. That's a digital colonialism of sorts, right? So hopefully that provides some context as to why we might want to consider a different model for how the internet works, seeing as there's not too many ideas out there in the world for how to displace this kind of monopoly. So the blockchain. So you'll hear a whole bunch of talk and a lot of crap about the blockchain and how it may in fact change the world. There's a lot of speculation in markets. People like to talk about people making money, and a lot of it's rubbish. But I do believe that it might change the world, and what is most important is that it represents a new way of doing things, rather than providing new efficiencies to fortify everything that's wrong with the web today, right? So for a centralized entity, a blockchain or a distributed ledger of peer-to-peer nodes may provide a superior way to coordinate activities across all manner of services. This is debated, and I was debating this with Ian earlier, and I think it is debatable. But to put it crudely, the whole idea is that there's a whole bunch of databases out there not communicating efficiently with one another, and one claim for the usage of the blockchain might be able to track with great detail the supply chain of a national industry, or so you go buy like a steak at a supermarket and you can tell the provenance of that steak because there's a hash. You going back to the cow on a farm somewhere, and so you can track these things. It's allegedly good for anti-counterfeiting, so there's been a lot of experiments in China with dealing with the counterfeiting industry. And more close to home in terms of music, majors like the idea of centralized blockchains because they like the idea of like impenetrable DRM, which I don't think anyone here would say is necessarily a great vision for the future of the internet. So yeah, another feature of the blockchain is that it's immutable, meaning that if information is captured and verified on it, the resiliency of the design ensures that information is there permanently. Permanent information is great if you want a resilient community network. So you take a network like SoundCloud, for example, when people were concerned about SoundCloud going down, like where's all our music going to go? Where's all this history that has taken place on this platform going to go? Resiliency is really good to build into that system. Resiliency for a state permanent record program may be a bit more scary. So it really just, the devil is in the detail about blockchain, and that's why I argue for decentralized control. I'm going to skip through some of this stuff. Yeah, so the preferable scenario is the era of new protocols. So when you read a lot of blockchain-y stuff online, people will communicate to you, the platform is dead, this is the era of the protocol. The idea of that is that the platform is one destination, the protocol is just simply a way of doing things, and of course, because this new kind of Web3 space is so fresh, there's a lot of money to potentially be the first actor to determine that first protocol. The good news, though, about that is that there's still time for new proposals, which is why I come here and evangelize a decentralized kind of proposition. So, yeah, a protocol is not a destination like a platform, rather it is a stack of tools or affordances allowing people to build their own systems on top. The cool thing about blockchains is their potential for decentralized coordination and consensus outside of a trusted third party. That means that we may arguably not need to depend on monolithic or corruptible institutions like banks or some on the more extreme side, the state, to coordinate our affairs. This offers the potential to design protocols of collective collaboration and ownership that look nothing like the creepy monopolies we have today. In short, a new web is being built, and it's still early enough for us to be idealistic about it. One community you might have heard about, Ethereum, proposes using smart contracts within the blockchain ledger to automate interactions between activities. So I can program into a system that if you pay me $20 for an artwork, I want 10% of that money to be distributed evenly to the 5 collaborators that help me make that happen. You might program it differently, and the more nodes in that system, the more creative you can be about those particular configurations. People are tweeting about me, and I can't read my thing. So yeah, this, in short, is an invitation to encode our own ideologies and values into the systems that we use to coordinate our lives. That's a powerful opportunity to reconsider what we are doing, why we are doing it, and ultimately who benefits. One of the aspects of these decentralized systems that's really promising to me is also the ability to conceive of group ownership of protocols or companies in the space through token distributions and voting rights. So one can imagine ecosystems of diverse and idealistic cross-border cooperatives where value is automatically distributed in accordance with a shared set of values. So this group equity model may in fact also provide a way to transition platforms of utility from Web 2 to something better. So what if we all own this festival, for example? Yeah, so I'm running out of time, but I often use the analogy of the independent musical kind of renaissance of the 80s and 90s in opposition to the major label infrastructure of being like, no, this is a new way of doing things, and our ideology is encoded into all of our actions as being synonymous perhaps with the opportunities afforded by new decentralized protocols and what we might be able to do with them. And so that's my time. Sorry, I kind of had to, yeah. Sorry to brain dump on you.
That's a lot to think about there, some of which we are going to address in the discussion we'll come back to. But Ian, maybe you could tell us a bit about your history and the projects that you have worked on.
Sure.
Give us an idea of, or give the audience an idea of your work.
Sure, and it's really, these are important topics. I'm super happy to be a part of this discussion. Thank you. I'm 45. So I started college in 1990, and I graduated in 1994, and I studied computer science. And it was over that time that it went from being, I might as well have said rocket science in 1990, but in 1994, you meet someone at a party, and they would say, "Oh, I was on America Online last night," and so for me, the only thing I've really ever done is watched the way the internet is changing culture. So when we talk about the new internet, to me, I think it's, we're looking at what was this grand promise. I remember very well as a music fanatic in 1994 seeing the Internet Underground Music Archive. And this to me was like, oh my God, we're gonna take the power away from the major labels and level the playing field. Then, of course, I went on to Internet Underground Music Archive and listened to every song, and they were all garbage. And I realized, oh shit, if 99% of what the majors put out, imagine what they pass on. It was this realization that there's more to the story than control versus not. And I think that this is what we've seen over and over. We watched, over the last 20 years, we watched Microsoft try to be AOL. We watched AOL try to be Yahoo. We watched Yahoo try to be Google. We watched Google try to be Facebook. And we've watched Facebook try fairly successfully to be Snapchat, right? So I think that there are these fundamentals of what the internet has promised. and in terms of a decentralized network, TCP/IP being making it trivial to move things from one place to the other, and then there's the reality. So for me personally, my domain was always digital music. I started in the early '90s in academia. Was part of a small team that made a product called Winamp, which sold to AOL in 1999, and also made Gnutella, the first sort of P2P protocol. Unlike Napster, didn't have a server at the center of it. Was at Yahoo Music with the person who runs this festival for a long time in the middle of the 2000s, 4 years. Had a startup called Topspin that was about direct to consumer, really disintermediating the labels and allowing artists to go direct to consumer, which was ultimately unsuccessful startup. I sold the company for a lot less than my investors had given me, not a success. Then built a music service called Beats Music as a spin out of Beats Electronics, sold that to Apple, built Apple Music, and Beats One was Zane Lowe, and then moved to Paris to look after digital for large luxury company called LVMH. But for me, these underlying pieces have been the same throughout. There's these fundamentals where what the internet has really done is it's taken consumer choice from what is available to us at the local newsstand or on the local FM dial or on network or cable television, and it's meant that I can communicate to you wherever you are. And I think fundamentally it's changed the definition of the word local. Local used to mean near me, and now local means shared interest internationally. And that's what appealed to me about the internet in the very beginning. As a kid from a small town in Indiana, when I got online, I met people who liked the same music as me for the first time in my life. And that was the promise of the internet to me. And I think when I left college in 1994, I saw only upside in that. And I think I actually went back to my university a couple months ago and gave a talk the same week that Mark Zuckerberg was speaking for Congress, and I thought, there was a lot. There's a lot behind the. You can use a brick to build a house or break a window, and I think every tool that we could talk about could have equal use. We could build a private communication channel that could be used to protect us from the state. It could also be used, to build a sniper cell, right? And that's the reality of all of these technologies. I think when we think about the new internet and where we are today, where we really are is we're at peak internet. The dot-com bubble was because lots of us saw this future coming, and we thought it was going to be here tomorrow. And we were wrong. It took a long time to get critical mass of consumers online, and just this year, we finally have more than half of the human population on the internet. If you don't read Mary Meeker's report every year, there should be a national holiday, right? The State of the Internet report, and that was one of the things that was in it. I think so. We're at this point now where there is no digital. That's a nonsense word. There is no social media. That word doesn't mean anything either. Data, that word doesn't even mean anything, right? Because you have to double click and in each case go, what are we really talking about? Because what isn't digital? What isn't collecting data? How aren't we connected? We're at a much more granular level of understanding of all these things now. And the things that are truly future, we can see, augmented reality, cryptocurrency, artificial intelligence. These are today where the internet was in 1994. We know they're going to change our lives, and what we can't see is that there's an iPhone lurking out there in 2007 that we can't yet predict. In 2005, we couldn't see the iPhone, right? So you remember that the internet is here today. It's a part of all of our lives. We're all coping with how we as human beings have evolved as a result of this thing being a part of our lives, and a lot of the ways that it's impacting us are absolutely negative. And now we're looking at these future technologies and trying to parse it all apart. I do think, though, that what Alistair and Matt are talking about are the crucial areas, and it's about control. Who owns and controls your data, and who owns and controls this internet thing? The good news is that you can't put it back in the box. Like TCP/IP is not going away. The thing we ultimately do control it. Facebook needs to remember that the network effects work both directions. When everybody's there, everybody has to be there, and when people start to leave, everybody leaves. Ask MySpace, right? And so that's up to us. We collectively have that power, and we have to take it.
Okay, so the long view historical take. This is going to be very interesting. I think the first question here is probably the broadest and the hardest to answer. But to me, I feel as though it's mostly been trial and error on the internet so far, i.e. things get built. We don't really understand what the consequences of them are until sometime after. And now that we've been living with the internet for a couple of decades, a few decades, maybe we have a chance for a smarter architectural design. And on a macro level, what are we aiming for if we could better architect a new internet? You guys have touched on some of the things that you would want, but on a broader level, what is it what do we want from a new internet? Are we looking for redefining economic systems? Are we looking, are we looking for changing? How do we want to change society? How do we think that this could happen? Or what is it that you want from the internet that's bigger than privacy, decentralization? These would be routes to get to your goals. This is a big question, broad question. Maybe we could start with maybe it's better to zero in on some of the smaller questions.
I think we could try. I think the thing is that from my perspective, to answer that question, it's hopefully I'm not spoiling the end of the book *Sapiens* for anyone, but the question is, what do we want to want? And as humanity, we don't agree on that question. Right? So it depends on what it is you want, and we probably all three have different answers but they're probably more similar than a lot of people elsewhere. But I think from my perspective, since the thing that drew me to the internet originally was having much more cultural choice than what I grew up with. Right? So for me, I want to protect the choice I have as a human being and as a customer. I think we're fundamentally moving away from mass media, and we're moving to something that's more niche and more tribal. And I think that's both positive and negative. It's positive because a group of like-minded people can get together for something like this. It's negative when that's used to influence elections, right? But again, you're always going to have both sides of the coin, I think, in anything that we describe. So I think what I want is, as an individual, the ability to exercise the choice, the ability to exercise, when I put my phone down and when I pick it up. When I pick it up, am I using it for utility, or am I using it to waste my time? I think that I just want the choice to do what it is that I want to do with these tools and technology. My choice whether or not to share my data, et cetera.
Cultural abundance and freedom to not be led into these by design.
Exactly.
What do you guys think?
I think I agree with that. The difference for me, and we began an argument on this coming up to the stage and never got to resolve it, but the difference for me is that I don't see an environment of cultural abundance. My primary, and I was saying this backstage, my primary interest in decentralized ownership systems is not to try and sell people on a future in which every artist makes a living from their art. It's to try and sell people on a future of saying, we can still salvage some of this before everybody turns into independent contractors gaming an Instagram feed to try and get attention from people at the other side of the world. Because when I look at independent musical cultures, for example, the idea of a diversity of choice is well represented, and people talk about it, and they use it to sell kind of the pretense of it. Or Spotify, for example, of look at all these wonderful things, and what I see is a bunch of people acting in exactly the same way, given an incentive model to play the feed, which people do in the visibility industry is really the industry, which I'm sure you'll know more about. And I think it's super interesting to me, not as a critique, but that you have spent your life working with musicians to try and get them paid, and now you work for the visibility industry. That to me is telling, not of you as a person, but of just the way things went, right?
Yeah.
Because I see that in our scenes. I see venues closing, labels having to work with Spotify even though they don't make any money, and once proud traditions turning into photo shoots. And I think that has to do with the way that networks work, with the ownership of those networks, and the fact that ultimately everything is run by an advertising industry. And it's a crude way of putting it, but I think that it's true. And so a scenario for me is when you start looking at decentralized governance, at least then proud traditions or proud people or different groups of diverse people can get together and say, hey, we want this festival or this label to work like this. It's probably not going to compete with a Red Bull or other companies who have the resources or the visibility to make a big impact in the space, but at least it will be resilient. At least it's going to stick around. And I hate to sound deflating on that, but that to me sounds quite optimistic, actually, just as a starting point of not trying to sell people on the idea of blockchain and so on and so forth is going to, we'll have fully automated luxury communism within 5 years and everything's going to be chill. More just being like, no, things are actually kind of bad, and so I think we need to reorient our priorities here. Yeah.
Okay, so it sounds like you think that the internet as it stands now is leading actually towards a certain homogenization, and,
yeah,
and you want an environment
100%.
Where these subcultures are able to flourish.
It's down to the formula. Show me a country in the world where people aren't making trap music with literally the same plugin.
Yeah.
That's not a diversity I'm particularly
point.
excited about, to be quite honest.
Alistair, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, to go back to your question, what do I want, or what do I think we should want from the internet? I would like to see a genuinely common space, or a constellation of spaces which are there to serve all of our interests and to which we all share some kind of ownership over. That's not to say there shouldn't be any commercial presence in there or other activities, but something which is genuinely a part of us and which we have control over. And that was what the internet originally promised. That was what we were presented with. And I think the big mistake here is to see this as a problem of protocols and architecture. I think that was the big mistake right from the start, because when you look at the 90s, and I was interested in what Ian was saying, because I was experiencing much the same thing at much the same stage of my life. When you look at this incredible sort of access point to this world of information, you would never. I can remember reading about Japanese dog food on Mosaic browser and things like that. Very exciting. But it was like an incredible moment when you see all this stuff. But it's been remarkably easy when we think about it for that space, which was supposedly completely robust, untainable, uncensorable, uncontrollable, and completely uncommercial, to be utterly colonized and enclosed. And we've seen that process happen very, very quickly if you look at it. And the problem, I think, is that there was no social political dimension to the thinking of the creation of the internet. It was all thought to transcend physical time and space. And ultimately, human interests come into that, and they weren't really taken into account. And I think that was, on one part, naive. I think on one part, it was cynical. And it's remarkable how easy naivety and cynicism blend together in these kind of circumstances. But I think if we want to look and reevaluate the internet, we have to think about the social and political structures that manage it. And it has to be some kind of collective action. And I think that would be my other point here, is that already there's a tendency within our wider political framework, but also when you come to digital, of looking at these things as individuals, as we take our own steps. And in a sense, my own project is a part of that, where we encourage people to take political privacy steps to look at their own online privacy. But we really need to think about a wider political and collective action around these issues, and look at ourselves as a body of people working collectively rather than as individuals.
Yeah, that's something that I would agree with in that. I also would love to see a cyber utopia, but I'm wondering, will any new internet the prospect of the new internet now, is this just going to replicate the existing power structures of the real world as we already know it? And okay, I see one person nodding and one person shaking their head, so let's talk about that.
Well, from my point of view, I think it will, unless you have a conscious view to avoid that. And you have to have a genuine agenda and framework to actively challenge it. If you think that the technology itself is going to change power structures just because it's technology and just because it potentially shares information, well, I think that's been proved wrong. And I just think these are things which we have to think about as human beings, as a collection of human beings, and look at how do we put the processes and the structures in place that prevent that from happening, because it really does require proactive engagement from all of us to prevent it. It doesn't just happen on its own.
Right. Yeah, we can't rely on the tech to do it for us. We're going to have to, as people, implement.
Yeah, I mean, there's different kind of layers of power structures, right? Like if it's a class structure or kind of a diversity structure, then yeah, we've seen that. I mean, you need deliberate effort to try and address those things.
Yeah.
Same in crypto. I mean, if you look at the distribution of people who own Bitcoin, you know, the same kind of biases that you would see in the real world are enacted there too. It all depends on the protocol, right? So if you are looking to build into a system, you're looking to build certain principles into that system, the opportunity to do that on a granular technical level, the new opportunity to do that is quite interesting in order to address those things. The other thing that I think is relatively interesting about the crypto space just generally, though, is addressing kind of geopolitical power structures, right? So you see crypto outside of Silicon Valley, for example, or outside of, there's a bunch, I mean, the most patents in the blockchain space were registered in China, but you see projects in Poland, you see projects, Nigeria is a big kind of hub, Nairobi, projects spawning up from all around the world because mostly through the kind of tokenized fundraising ecosystem, you're finding ways for projects to find a large kind of groundswell of support from distributed sources. So that is a different power structure that is slightly being unsettled by that. And that's why you won't find all that many people too confident or excited about crypto in Silicon Valley themselves, right? Because it's somewhat antagonistic to their vision of a centralized future for the internet. Yeah.
I think this is what's interesting. I mean, look at human history, you know, and all of the changes that we've been through. The internet is a fundamental change in humanity.
Absolutely.
Human beings have never been connected like this before. So it will change everything. I mean, you know, I would ask, like, let's look at any large company, any big cap company today. Who's safe? Really nobody. I mean, you know, the biggest companies in the world today are completely unsafe in terms of do they have the same kind of staying power that companies had 100 years ago? Absolutely not, right? And I think that, you know, that is kind of a fundamental difference. So I think, will power centralize, whether it's Bitcoin or the stock market, or yeah, it probably will. But I think that, you know, the joke of Mark Zuckerberg sitting in front and talking to American senators, his constituency is way bigger than any of theirs, right? He's sitting there going, bet you didn't see this company, huh? I've got more than 2 billion people behind me. How many people are in your district again? Yeah, exactly. You know, but he's in a super precarious place. You know, I think, please everyone read Tim Wu's latest book, The Attention Merchants, because hopefully it will, you know, properly place, you know, this where we are in the history of advertising, you know, in this crimes against humanity moment. You know, people stealing your attention and selling it to someone else is truly evil. And, you know, I think that, but that's the thing is, we're getting the joke. Don't bet against humans, right? And I think that, you know, it's a wave. You know, it comes, we see promise, we all get on board, and then we start to, you know, through work like you guys are doing, we start to question it. There's no, I mean, if we can bet on anything, it's that what today looks like will not be what it looks like in 10 years. Like, that's the safest bet of all. Right, you know, and ask anybody who had, you know, all of their money in Yahoo in 2007. Right, these things change much more quickly than they ever have before. So that's why I think it, you know, I think things like cryptocurrency are genuinely threatening to what we see today as state sovereignty, because I think what you're starting to see is that the physics move away from the past. The internet has just simply changed us. So, you know, these states have a completely different role to play in the future. If the definition of local has changed, then the value of your local government has changed. And local could be city, state, you know, country. So that's why I think that These changes are, we're just at the beginning of the changes that are downstream of this reconnection of humanity.
Okay, that's an interesting point. We've got different ideas of what, different ideas, all of them completely valid, of like what are the existing power structures and how they're changing. And this brings me to another question is, perhaps one of the biggest challenges facing a new internet right now is old nation states. And I think that the net neutrality repeal in the US and the new copyright proposals in the EU are good examples of this. So
And China.
Yeah, and right. And do you think that any new internet will be able to operate within this political framework, or we're going to have to supersede it, or what? You see the question.
Yeah.
It's a big question.
There's a difference between the internet and then commercial entities on the internet.
Right.
The issue of like regulatory solutions, I mean, like GDPR, I take as an example. I, on principle, support the idea. I live in Germany. I like that we live in a social democratic state that also has opinions about data privacy, for example. I think that is a wonderful thing. However, it took, 20 years to put together that legislation. I'm not overly optimistic that state legislature can act kind of proactively enough to be ahead of this stuff, and particularly, as Ian puts it, in the crypto community. I mean, I am very much invested in that. I have very kind of trenchant political beliefs that I try to impose in that. But there's some scary stuff. And these are people having political debates about how society will run once all this stuff's gone away, right? And of course, it's super hubristic, and some of it's like psychedelic and ridiculous. But I do think you're correct. I mean, cryptocurrency or trustless decentralized system is an existential threat to the nation state.
Exactly.
And so it's very, very important for us to jump on those conversations now, irrespective of kind of your field, or at least entertain them. Because I don't see the state, I mean, I saw this with like the SEC questioning like the securities around tokens and so on and so forth, and like the level of knowledge on a state level about this stuff is I don't invest too much confidence in that, beyond the fact that I do like the idea of state regulation. I mean,
yes.
In principle I'm behind that, but I don't believe that the states we have are really tooled, with the exception of a few.
It was clear with Zuckerberg speaking to Congress. That
Absolutely.
was
just it's
painfully clear.
It's children and adults. Yeah. It's crazy.
Okay, basically, we're not going to be able to rely on the state to save us.
Yeah, I mean, this issue of cryptocurrency is not something, I think as an organization, we've kind of been avoiding blockchain as a general rule, but as something to discuss. But I mean, one thing that strikes me about it, there are massive and rapidly accumulating blocks of power within currency and cryptocurrency and blockchains now as well, and that's that they are a threat, but also that governments are quite adept and quite capable of shutting down blockchain and cryptocurrency systems, which is happening as well, so they can do that quite easily too. I think there was an assumption across, I mean, it is interesting, isn't it, that over the course of the development of the internet, we've had a wider ideological framework, which pretty much to a greater or lesser extent, the whole world has been following, where states have been viewed to be increasingly irrelevant, and I think that was kind of a bit of a mistake. When it comes to it, nation states marshal vast amounts of resources and capacity to change and shape the world we live in. That's the reality of it, and things like GDPR are a very, very positive step, and the reality is that actually, aside from being sort of in the so-called cloud, this is a real infrastructure, and that data actually sits somewhere, and it can be subject to state regulation, and I think that's quite important to know. I mean, the reality is that whatever you think of states and regulators, they are to some degree accountable to people, and they have that sort of sense of purchase, or however flawed it is, which maybe we need. So I think states are a big part of this, and they're not irrelevant, and we have to think about our own geographical space when we're looking at this, but it's certainly not all the answer, and we have to look at other methods and ways of getting purchase on the data and the processes and the structures that are shaping our information environment.
Yeah, and that's, sorry.
I was going to say, I think with all of this, I mean, what we've had the fortune of seeing up close, probably more than any generation before us, is this interplay between the governments, the commercial entities, and the people, right? Like everything you talk about can be that. I mean, I always thought that the internet firewall in China was there for cultural purposes. Living in Europe now, it's very clear for me to see it's actually to protect them from being owned by Facebook and Google, like Europe is. And will the next Facebook or Google come out of Europe? Very unlikely, right? And getting your head around why that's the case. I think, and then seeing Zuckerberg speak to the American Congress, watching the EU try to put together GDPR, watching Emmanuel Macron speak very intelligently about artificial intelligence and investing in his people in this way, but then still seeing the challenge of building businesses in that country on a daily basis. I think we're seeing this up close and personal, and I think we've seen it to some degree in the U.S. where the situation that we're in hopefully will drive people like you into the state to try to fix these problems, because we do need for the power to shift. And I think the nice thing is it does give, you were mentioning the blockchain work that's going on in the smaller countries, or think about the way that Estonia has used technology to really to build strength apart from Russia in its small size and independence. These are the kinds of there's opportunities as well as threats from the technology today.
Yeah, and just wanted to make the point that it is important, in the work that you're doing, to create a stronger public will for change.
Yes.
And Ian, you touched on this earlier when you were speaking about your work, but the internet definitely has allowed us to find our tribes, and Internet 2.0 has probably made those tribes more isolated, polarizing society in some stark ways. And the outcome of the internet is a niche for everyone, which maybe the pessimistic view is it allows them to retreat so far into themselves that there's no longer a shared space between us. Which goes back to what your idea of cyber utopia would be. So how do we address that and still have the freedom?
My personal view is I think that as human beings we can only manage 30 friends in our lives. I think that we went from being tribal. In my lifetime, I watched the small town I grew up in go from having local businesses with local customers to having Walmart local customers, to now having local businesses with global customers, right? So I think there's a lot of positivity in this shift. I think that away from globalization and to something different. We talk about Amazon, but the fact is Amazon enables marketplace sellers in a way that Walmart did not. Right, so to me, there's positivity on this side of the coin. I think that we're tribal by nature. I think the internet has changed the definition of the word local. In the music business, none of us want to go back to the peak of the music business. Who wants to go back to Britney Spears and the Backstreet Boys, right? That was 1999, as big as the music business ever got, because the old systems, and it was a blip on the radar from 1950 to 2000. Mass media drove mass culture. What do we want? The Brady Bunch, the Love Boat, and different Strokes back? I don't think so. Culturally, mass water cooler is not what we want. And I think that the reality is we're tribal as human beings. Now we can find our tribe internationally, and we will, frankly, right? So, and even if you're getting international news, you're going to get it from a source that's not objective. None of us are objective. We're all culturally biased. And I don't think that's going to change.
Yeah, that's true. Guys, no, we move on.
Sorry.
No, it's good.
I just wonder. I don't want. I don't like the idea of everybody being so polarized that we can't actually communicate with each other anymore. Mm-hmm. But I do agree with you that I think that we are tribal by nature, actually.
Yeah, look, it's funny to me coming from America to Europe, because the way that the French talk about the Spanish or the Italians or the Germans, imagine if I talked about different cultures in America that way. We just.
But we do. We talk about Southerners and we talk about New Englanders and massholes. And,
I feel like we were. At least my generation was trained on this Sesame Street utopia, right? And so I think that that the fact is it really is that tribalism is just part of who we are as human beings.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would say it comes back to what question Ian asked right at the start of this, which was what do we really want, and what's that about? And for me, one of the most important things as human beings that we really want, and the thing that actually makes us satisfied and content and as happy as people, is the strength and depth and breadth of our human relationships. And those human relationships, in my view, cannot be replaced by online interactions. It's something in a physical space. I mean, why are we all here in one room? We could do all this online. You could be watching. We could be sitting on a screen doing it on Skype or something. But for some reason, we've all congregated in one place. And why is that? And for me, fundamentally, it's about physical space. Physical connection is actually what we really want. And to a certain degree, the technology and online technology can facilitate that, but we have to ask ourselves, to what extent is that actually taking something away? And when we have a human interaction in a physical space like this, for example, weirdly enough, none of us are abusing each other, none of us are shouting at each other, none of us are harassing each other. But somehow that seems so much easier online, and I think there's a connection there. So I think we really have to think very carefully about the kinds of interactions we have and whether we really need to do them online, or whether, even if it's more limited, it might be better to have those interactions in physical spaces instead.
I completely agree. Imagine if this conversation was happening on Reddit.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I think it's I think it's worth talking about. I feel like we've sort of lived through that time when we didn't know that cigarettes caused cancer.
Yeah.
Right. And now, I mean, for me, like, I've deleted my Facebook account. I unfollowed everyone on Instagram because I don't want an endless feed on my phone. I know my limitations. Right. There's a reason that I didn't start a lot of addictions, right? But I started one here.
Yeah.
And so, I think that that's exactly right. The other thing that I've done, to your point, is I've actually written down my list of 30 people,
Right.
and I connect with them.
Yeah.
When I have a free moment, I try to connect with them in some real way, instead of going on Reddit. But it's true. I think it's just like with food, and there's so many ways that we're fighting against our own biology.
Yeah.
What's the thing? I agree on the physical space thing too. Like, it occurred to me. I mean, there's this kind of like odd illusory victory online too, right? With any kind of like small community or tribe or however you want to categorize it, it's like everyone gets to celebrate their own victories online. Everyone gets to have their own place in infinite space online. While if you live in a major city, like met someone who lived in Barcelona yesterday, like, yeah, I can't live in the city anymore. It's too expensive. It's co-working spaces of people, selling shoes on Instagram or whatever crap they're doing. And you're like, yeah, there's all these illusory victories that we're all kind of finding each other at, while at the same time, the physical stuff that's really precious, that we only have like a very limited amount of, is being taken away from us or repurposed, right? And I remember last year, Holly and I, we were at this festival, like Atonal, right? So you get to go and like live in the 90s for a little bit because it's like full of, Trezor techno and all this kind of stuff. And we came there from this place, the Kopi, which is an old squat that, so we get to go live in the like late 80s, and like people are walking around with Napalm Death t-shirts and so on and so forth. And I'm like, well, why are these cultures still around? I mean, one, they're still cool, whatever, but like, why are they so resilient when they bear no relation to the stuff we're talking about? Like Zuckerberg in front of Congress, laughing at his feudal subjects. Why are these cultures still around? It's like, oh, because they own the building. That's why. That's really why. And so we get to have all our, we involved in mostly kind of digital cultures where we go online and like I'll rant about decentralization and people like retweet me and it'll be really cool. And I'm like, yeah, but this is all going to go away in 3 years if I have a kid and need to go earn some money some other way. This is all going to go away because we don't own space. And so I think this fundament of like bringing the politics of the internet or the ideas that are gestating through finding different people on the internet into physical space is something very compelling to me. And that's why I push the group equity idea too, because I'm like, we could probably own a bunch of space together, actually, if we would find some way to, to coordinate ourselves and then align a protocol of thought or what we want, right? Align our interests to say, no, it's actually a very significant cultural importance that we own this space in Barcelona and that we let artists go there so that they can experiment or whatever it is that your community determines is important. Okay. Yeah, but space is a huge thing that's missing from this equation that's precious.
This is a good answer. Basically emphasizing physical space over virtual space as a way to address this problem. Now, I feel like we're evolving as a species around new technologies. I think it's pretty inarguable that our attention spans are shorter. We're losing memory ability. But now we also have the ability to store some things, more or less perfectly forever. So like there'll be a record of this talk and it'll, could exist online forever, more or less. So how else do you think we might evolve? This big speculation here.
But are we evolving, do you think? Or is this just experiential? I mean, if you put us in a place where you took all these things away, say someone switched the electricity off, which could easily happen, A, all that data would disappear, B, our behavior and our experience would be completely different. I'm sure we would slow down and our attention spans would increase accordingly. I mean, we're just adapting to the environment we're in, I think. And that's just where we are. We're in a space where we have all of this information, it's not filtered, and we're responding as human beings to that. But I think you could change that quite easily. I don't know that we're fundamentally changing at a sort of circuit board, a hardwired level. I think it's more about the software.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that, but I think the only thing that humans do is adapt.
Yeah.
Right? From the moment you're born, we just adapt. And we are, as you said, adapting to our surroundings and this availability, and we continue to take advantage of it. And the thing that won't stop is, even if the people in this room aren't, trying to build artificial intelligence weapons, someone out there is, and that's going to impact our surroundings, and we're going to keep, needing to find our way to keep up with that. But I think that. I think we've all, because of it, look at we're here because we've always been excited about this. None of us, and probably none of you, are the ones who have been when I was a kid. Like, we've all been trying to embrace what of this excites us. And I think that it has. I mean, my mom worked in a factory for 25 years, and I've had a completely different kind of life and completely different opportunities afforded to me because I learned to code. So I think that it's actually it's really fundamental in the way that it's changing. You look at something like École 42, École 42 in School 42 in Paris, which was created by Xavier Niel. It's a school where it's the only school in the world where the only thing you do from the moment you start to the moment you finish is code. There are no teachers. There are no books. It's a coding school, and it's free. And admission is done entirely through kind of a logic test in a way. So it's when you are gifting the skills of coding to 1,000 people a year, you're changing France. Actually, these are not small changes. I think that it's impossible to overstate the level of change that society will go through because of this reconnection of people. I think that it's maybe it changes society more than it changes us. But to your point, we're all living in that context.
Yeah.
We all live in some context.
I mean, the only adaptation thing to me is, this is not really an evolutionary thing, but it's something I'm really conscious of, is, with the myriad opportunities, or just this kind of increased sense of awareness that anything you say or do is potentially a moment that people are witnessing, training yourself to talk like nobody's listening is actually really cool. And that's something that you have to kind of deal with, in a sense, where when you see the politics, for example, when you say, can you imagine if this was on Reddit?
Right.
I see that same dynamic of feeling like, oh, I gotta be careful, and which leads to ultimately to like an over-professionalization, or kind of a curbing of potential discussions that could happen. And that's one thing I have seen occur that I do try myself to steer away from, is just forget that things can be documented. Because even in the arts, for example, I mean, I see people take less risks because they're more visible early, and ultimately that leads to a scenario we don't want.
Unfortunately, that is all the time we have. I wish that we had more time because it's such a vast topic and we could go forever probably. And apologies that we don't have time for audience questions. Maybe you'll be able to track these guys down after the panel and ask some questions individually. I want to thank the panelists so much, and I want to thank you guys for coming. Thanks to Sónar+D, and we are
Lisa.
Europe. Cheers.